let's call the meeting to order. Roll, please.
Okay, Member Bajakian,
Present.
Chair Garay,
Present.
Member Kaczynski,
Present.
Member Marsh,
Present.
and Member Walker.
Here.
Our first order of business is the approval of our March 14th, 2016 minutes. Can you believe it's a year since we've last sat up here together? So, any comments regarding the minutes?
I move to approve. I actually read them thoroughly, so. Yep. Seconded.
Let's vote. Everybody approve the minutes as presented?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. On to ordinance review. Brian, do we see if there are going to be public comments now?
I mean, if you want to, it's entirely up to the board, because this is not quasi-judicial or
Got
anything.
it.
So
That's what I was
if
wondering.
you decide, if you want to take public comment on each ordinance as it comes in, I mean, if that's your, that's your prerogative, you can certainly do that.
Yeah. And because it's not quasi-judicial, we don't have to swear anybody in.
Exactly, that's
Okay, good.
right. So, but, it may work out better if, as you call the ordinance, if you want to take public comment at the very beginning for that particular ordinance, and then as we move through the other ones, then you can do that likewise.
Good, well, let's do it methodically. Let's take them one at a time. And may I suggest that we start with the first ordinance, the one that has to do with, I believe it's P and Z plan review. Is that correct, Jamie?
The first one is ordinance number 619,
Yes, indeed.
site plan review procedures.
Good. And would you please give us a little background for starters?
Well, I might like to defer to the attorney, the author of these ordinances, to discuss how these dovetail, how these fit in with our current code and where we're proposing changes and what those issues are. So with your indulgence, I would turn
Yes,
it over to
please.
the attorney.
Thank you.
Okay, and if I can say, and this applies to all three ordinances, these proposed ordinances that are in front of you are just kind of a starting point for discussion. So if you like it, if you don't like it, if you have massive changes, if you look at it and say, well, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, we're just here to take your input and then go from there. So, that's just kind of a starting point. But ordinance number 619 is basically a way that we have looked at some other codes, and what we're trying to do is to, I guess, give the zoning official some extra input as far as when he looks at single-family and two-family homes regarding if compatibility issues. Currently, if the homes, and I'm not talking multifamily because that is something that where there are other things that are looked at there, but just on the single-family and the two-family homes, basically the way it has worked here, which, it's to say there's nothing wrong with it, but, if it meets the code, then it's essentially approved because it meets the code. Now, what we've attempted to do is to add in some language in the ordinance that talks about where this board would look at those plans when they come in before the zoning official makes a determination, and that the board then would go ahead and look at the plan to say, okay, it's some of the factors you would be looking at is does it is there a plan, does it accomplish a desirable transition with the streetscape? The overall balance and proportion of the proposed buildings will be considered. The height and scale of each building shall be compatible with the site and other buildings on site. It goes without saying that the building would have to meet our code. However, these are some extra compatibility issues or compatibility, I don't want to say requirements, because it's not really the way it's currently worded now. It's not a requirement. It is just something that you all would look at, that you could have a back and forth discussion possibly with the developer, and could offer your experience and insight to the developer. And so that way, after the meeting, you would make a recommendation. That recommendation would go to the zoning official, who would then go ahead, and the zoning official would take into account your comments that you have made at this meeting. So it's not like you would have an up or down recommendation of we approve or not approve. The current version of this ordinance is basically you would kind of give the plans a look-see and go, okay, here's the comments that we have, and you pass those along to the zoning official, who I would think would then take that into account before he makes a determination on the plans. So that's the way it's currently set up. And so that's kind of the starting point of the discussion.
Thank you. And this is an issue that we have been talking about for the last 25 years, I believe, and we've considered whether or not, as a town, we want an architectural review board, formal board or not, and now this appears to be a hybrid, where it's merely a subjective comment for consideration and nothing binding. Is that correct? Exactly.
And also, let me add on to that. Now, I would imagine this would primarily come in for new construction. However, if someone is working on an existing single-family or two-family home, if they are increasing the square footage greater than the current 50% that is existing, or if they are doing renovations on the single-family or two-family home, that the renovations cost more than 50% of the current value of the structure, not the property, but of the structure, then that would also trip the requirement that would come in front of this board as well. So it's not just brand new construction, it would be if you were kind of doing a major remodel. And that is something too, you can look at those percentages and, whatever comments you have on those as well.
And Brian, would we meet as a body, as we are today, for example, and having a discussion regarding a particular set of plans? Is that the procedural intent?
Yes, it is. Now, once again, it's because this is just kind of a starting point for the discussion, we have not put any, in a lot of other codes and other places that I've worked, there are specific requirements where, okay, once a set of plans comes in, then staff has so many days, or the board has so many days before the board has to review it within a certain period of time. So that way we are not holding up, developers, for long periods of time where it's constant review or whatever. Now, none of that is in here, and if you want something like that in here, we can, or we can just have, a procedures list or something, and you'll see that when we go on to the other ordinance, where, there are certain procedures that we'll probably have in place, and we could probably dovetail something like this in there within so many days of, staff receiving plans, that then it would have to be in front of this board. Now, I don't know, and that's something for your discussion as well, because let's say if you just have a meeting and then, or we receive plans 2 days prior to the meeting, but not in time to get it in front of you, then the person may have to wait 30 days before this board reviews it, before we get comments to our zoning official, and then before he can respond. So those are just some other topics for your discussion.
And within the context of the way this draft ordinance is currently written, would it be possible for this commission to have, for example, a subcommittee that might undertake that on a more informal basis? Or is it just the way it's written?
Well,
we need
the
to
way
meet
it's,
like this?
the way that this is envisioned is that we would be looking for this entire body to kind of make a decision on that. Because then once you start setting up, I would be hesitant to kind of go down the subcommittee route, because if there's just going to be 2 or 3 people looking at that, I think the intent was to kind of have this entire body look at it and give their entire input, because even the subcommittee would be, would have to meet in the sunshine, it would have to be noticed. And so I'm not sure if there would be a great time savings if that's what you would be looking for on that.
Thank you, duly noted.
Mr. Chair, could I just give a little background?
Yeah, please.
I think a couple of recent projects in town that have caused some concern, and I took it on myself to meet with the town attorney and town manager, and the zoning building official, where it became apparent that, that the person in charge, Manny in this case, is in a position where he's being asked to review building plans. These are final plans, not preliminary plans, and make a judgment call vis-à-vis the architectural style, compatibility. And these are, not land use issues. These are not building department issues. These are more impacting what could impact the community as a whole. And I think the concern was that there was one particular project that I almost came to a commission meeting by mistake. Luckily I did, because it had got so far that the town was in a position they really didn't know what to do in terms of the design solution. And I think the project is moving along, but it still had some concerns from citizens. People spoke up during that meeting, in objection. So I think it's really, and I've said this for the last 20 years in this chamber, that we are one of the few, if not the only, communities on the coastal area that does not have an architectural review committee of some kind. I'm not promoting a Palm Beach or a Gulfstream. I think they go a little bit extreme, but I think for the sake of the character of the town, we need to enact or adopt some form of review. And going to the question about subcommittee, I'm totally against that. I think we are an unused board. As you can see, this is the first meeting in a year, basically. And I'm not promoting, as we discussed, Richard and I, a month to month. It may not be, but we are experiencing a vast increase in building activity, which makes this committee or this board more relevant for what I'm just saying, that we have to be more conscious of items that are coming in. And the point is that applicants and owners go to a lot of expense to create a set of documents. And it's unfair, I think, that especially the applicant or the owner gets to a stage where then there's dissatisfaction, or the town finds it there are issues or problems with the design. You've got a full set of working documents, and now you've got to ask, and right now it's almost an informal thing. Could you go back and revise this or change something? I think it's only fair that if there's an issue, and I'm not saying that every application is going to have an issue, but if there is an issue, that they be alerted early enough to be able to respond one way or the other. They can say, we don't agree, and go to the town commission, or they say, yeah, let's go back and look at another alternative. So I think it's really the start of something that's very important in terms of preserving how this town is going to address future building activity. And as the attorney said, once you go over 50% of an existing, you have to comply as well, because that's the normal threshold. But I feel that it's so important for us to keep, there's a statement in here, consistent with established neighborhood character. Now, that's a wide open spectrum, but I think we have to be at least conscious of using that term to evaluate what's proposed. As I said, it's a lot of design is in the eye of the beholder, but I think we just need to have a check and balance here, that we don't, and take the burden off the building department, because I'm not saying they're not qualified, but I think it's outside their realm to have to be put in that position. I think it's unfair. There's also other issues, and you've seen a few new projects in town. This one has been a bug under my saddle, or spur, or whatever it is, for many years, about, do we want flat roofs or don't we want flat roofs? And our ordinance states that as long as you have a 4 and 12 pitch, you can have a flat roof. I'm not hiding it. I live on Hudson, so we have that. And if that isn't a flat roof, then I'm a Chinaman. So we need to address that too. I think there are things we need to mop up onto this whole program and maybe rewrite some of the current ordinances. But I think it's very important to establish this ordinance. It's not something we want to dictate colors and get into the minutia of what a person likes or dislikes. I think it's more to preserve the fabric of the town as we know it. And, yeah, we're going to, hopefully continue to have an increase in building and expansion. But as I said, it's just kind of shocking to know that we're the only town that doesn't have any form of this committee. And as I said, it doesn't have to be overburdening to an applicant. So that's kind of where I stand, and we talked about it at length, and I hope the rest of the commission see it fit to, adopt something of this nature.
Thank you, Mark. Your comments are very meaningful, not only from a historic perspective, but also because you are an architect and you're in the trenches on these kinds of things every day and work with many communities. So thank you for your input. Any other commissioners?
Yeah, I have a comment. A section of this is underlined, and the implication is it was just put in.
Correct. The underlined section is added, and I don't know on this one if there's any strike-through that would be deleted, but the underline is the
Well-
added section.
Well, this was added, was my understanding.
Yes, sir.
And there are a number of reasons why something comes under review. There are at least 8 here.
Mr. Walker, can you go a little bit closer
Okay.
to the mic? Thank you.
There are a number of reasons why a plan goes under review. There are 8 of them, but they pick 2 out, which then causes it to be involved with the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm not sure why that was, but they must consider these 2 pretty important. I'll read them. Prior to the administrative official making a determination on the application, if the application involves the construction of a single or 2-family structure under separate ownership. What does that mean?
Well, what I'm looking at, if you look at paragraph B or subpart B just above that,
Right.
what I was trying to do without rewriting the entire section where you talk about minor and major developments, I'll just tell you, I've got some issues with that, but I didn't want to change the entire fabric of the way that you look at things, and maybe that's something that you all can give some input on at a later date or whatever, but I was trying to keep it in compliance with minor and major developments, because the way your code currently reads right now, if it's a minor development, it doesn't go through the process of coming in front of you all or getting approval. So therefore, the reason I added this section, I exempted out what was exempted before. I added back in to say, look, if it's more than 50%, or if it is a single or 2-family structure under separate ownership, I was just using the same language that was in the paragraph above because I wanted to keep it the same.
I don't want to question that. I'm questioning what this means. It becomes very important, apparently, if it's a single or 2-family structure under separate ownership. Why is that important, and what does that mean?
Well, I think if it's in single and in separate ownership, the way I'm looking at that is whether or not there's 2 people who owns it, whether or not there's 1 person who owns it, it doesn't matter if it's a single or 2-family structure, then this applies.
Okay, and the other one was greater than 50% of what you mentioned earlier, the existing square footage where the cost of renovation or remodeling exceeding 50% of the current value, then the Planning and Zoning Commission shall review the application.
Yes,
So
sir.
that 50% issue you must consider super important also.
Well, normally 50% is a kind of a common, and I think as Commissioner Marsh there had mentioned, 50% is a common threshold, whether it's non-conforming use or a tipping point a lot of times to trigger, okay, if it's greater than 50%, then a lot of times you've got to apply new codes, you've got to do this, and you've got to do that, and that's the reason I had 50%. If you all want to change it, you certainly can. It was just a starting point.
Or I think, yeah, the building departments, zoning departments use the 50% value of the structure, not the land, as Attorney Shedd had said. It's of the building structure itself, cost of the building. And that's a threshold that's universal in both planning, building, and most other departments.
Good. Any other commissioners?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment.
Yes.
Mark is the only architect on this board, as far as I know. I'm I can look at a set of plans, and I'm not sure if they're gonna include, elevations and, street views and all that kind of thing, and it's something they're gonna submit to us, but, I mean, I don't know on what basis we would reject or have a problem with something if it's within code. I mean, are we gonna start saying, well, we can't have a Tudor, or we can't have an Art Deco home on the street? On what basis are we gonna say this doesn't cut the mustard? And if it's arbitrary, doesn't that put us at risk for getting sued by people that are building a house that's within code?
Well,
Secondly, the other thing I want to mention is, this is going to impact on permitting in terms of the time of it. And maybe rather than it coming to non-professionals who don't really do this for a living, we should have an architectural board that looks at this. And again, I'm just throwing it out there as my reaction to this, is that
Actually,
I'm not sure we have the skills to do this and do it right.
I think actually quite the contrary.
Yeah?
A lot of the boards in other towns are lay people. They, by statute, I think you have to have one architect and possibly a landscape architect, but the majority of the board composition is usually lay people, so.
Okay.
And then that's done so that you don't get into the minutia of the style being inappropriate. It's more like just looking at it from a reasonable, most reasonable standpoint as possible, and just seeing, does this fit or not? And it works.
Yeah.
I think any professional designer or architect that's there can impact or input any technical aspect of it. But again, this is purely aesthetic. As I said, the building department is taking care of land use and setbacks and all the other issues. But this is really just to see, and yeah, nobody's discouraging a variety of styles as long as it's done proportionately, correctly to that style, rather than something that's going to be so garish or outlandish that we need to be here as just a kind of stopgap and say, hey, I think we got some problems here. And it's done at the very, as I said, very early stage of the design process. And the point I think, and I hope you're making, is I think we need to set up some submittal format so that we just don't get, final documents or just hand sketches. We need to have some minimal standards by which all of us can review what the proposal is, so it's clear enough that everybody can understand.
Right.
Not so technical that you get lost with it.
Right.
So I think that for the town manager and the town attorney, I think we have to look at what and I say short form submission requirement would be to have material brought for our review.
Yes,
One other. I guess I'm still not clear on how the decision is made that we get it. Do we get, if something, a plan passes everything, no code infractions, nothing, who decides what we get? I mean, if there are no infractions,
I think it's
I mean,
for
and
staff.
how do they decide, more importantly?
I think that's a good question, and we're not saying that every application has to come to this commission for review. I think it's, if there is discomfort, and I think, maybe discomfort is a tough word, but if there's some concern from a staff level, then they should then bring it to us. We're not taking over the whole, if a house is compliant and it looks fine, and it's not, I don't think it's a mandatory thing yet, unless I'll ask the attorney.
Well, no, I mean, under this ordinance,
It would
it
be.
would
It would be,
be,
yeah.
it would
That's
be
how I
a
read it, yeah.
mandatory thing that once it meets that threshold, staff doesn't have the ability to say yes or no. It would come to you. However, once again, what your input on this is not so much an up or down vote. It is more of, I guess, a recommendation, or I guess input to the building or to the zoning officials' decision on the structure. I would envision that once we start this process, that we would have something where I mean, lots of other communities out there have that, and we don't have to be so formal, but it would be like, look, we need to see the proposed street views. We need to see the proposed, how it would look on the site. So anyone can look at that and see, oh, okay, so this is the way it's going to look. Because whether or not it meets the code, that's really up to the zoning official as far as the height requirements. That's really not something that you all would be looking at so much, because the zoning official would be looking at that to see whether or not it actually meets the code.
And based on current activity, what would you anticipate, Jamie, the volume to be on a per-month basis or whatever?
Well, I think one of the things you have to consider here is, A, this is not quasi-judicial, correct?
No, it will be. When the
will
individual
be.
plan comes in front of you, yes, it will.
Well-
Even though it's only a recommendation, I think we would still treat it as quasi-judicial.
And the important thing is everybody gets treated the same. So my biggest concern here would be that once you establish the criteria for the threshold that it comes before you, every property that meets that threshold comes before you. And obviously, you'll be meeting on a much more regular basis to review these kinds of properties. If I understand this correctly, the proposal is for direction and feedback for the properties before the zoning official confirms that they are approved or not approved. I'm not sure, and maybe the attorney can address this, what happens if the applicant doesn't agree with the directive or feedback or aesthetic responses that they get from this board in that review process, what their recourse will be. As several of you have mentioned, the zoning official might ascertain that everything actually technically meets the code, but it doesn't meet the aesthetic considerations that this board may want it to fit within. So I'm not sure the recourse there in terms of the applicant at that point. But we also have to work out the procedural elements of what are going to be required. The 50% rule that you mentioned earlier is the threshold. I mean, that is the trigger in most cases where everything kicks in terms of updating codes, updating all the parts and pieces that are affecting this. Our biggest challenge, I think, will be to be consistent across properties, that everybody's being vetted out the same in terms of the issues that are compatibility, aesthetic compatibility, and compliancy with the code. And then also that the zoning official, the building official have checked off on everything once they move forward in terms of being compliant.
And regarding volume, how many applications do you get a month currently, approximately?
On a revenue metric, we are about 200% above our projected revenues for building permits in general. I believe we have, I'm trying to think of the number now, about 20, you know the number of permits currently active on new houses? Anybody know that number off the top of their head?
New houses?
Yeah, new construction permits that are in right now.
There
Is it-
are between 4 and 7, I believe.
Brand new ones? Okay.
Yeah, how many do you get a month that meet this criteria?
I think she said 4 to 7.
Well,
It's,
that varies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just-
This past year we've exploded.
Okay.
So with this past year, you would have met probably 7 times.
Okay. Over the course of a year? 7 times.
Right.
To review how many applications? Or just seven applications, period?
Yes, but they come in staggered usually, so you probably would have met around 7 times.
Okay, okay. So,
That-
so if I can.
And that's
clarify that.
that's just for new
that's
construction.
for new
Right.
construction. There's tons more that are partial
Right.
renovations or
And
sub-permits.
tons means, how many?
Probably 3 times that amount.
Oh, really?
I
50%.
think you're going to be meeting at least every other month, if not monthly, and you may
Okay.
have to meet monthly just in order to give due process to the people applying to go through this, so that they're not artificially delayed because it happens to be an off month.
Yes.
I could anticipate that you would be meeting on a regular basis in order to process this step.
Which brings up another thing, is how do we enact a submission process?
So as to do it, as you said, where it doesn't impact the applicant too much, you don't have a full set of working drawings.
Right. No, but I mean, do we have a form that they fill out? Do we, you know?
We'll take
what's
public
voting?
comments in a minute.
This is not a public comment. I'm your building official.
Well, just hold it, please. We want to, let us finish our discussion. You'll have a chance, please. Yes, Mark?
No, I just think we need to think about, you know, how the form is set up and what the submission requirements are.
And that'll,
For exactly that, to set up a, you know, a uniform submission and review process.
And Brian, I'm sorry, Mark, are you done?
Yes, sir.
Brian, are there other communities that you know of that have adopted this kind of an advisory procedure versus a mandatory architectural review procedure? And
no, I'm not, because once again, this is purely kind of going back to one of the questions that was raised earlier, like what recourse a developer may have if, you know, if the developer comes in here, submits his plans, you all look at it and you have a bunch of comments, and the developer says, okay, that's fine, but I'm still proceeding forward with my current plans, and I'm taking that to the zoning official, and I want him to approve those. Depending on what your comments are and whether or not the plans completely comply with the zoning code, you know, that may be the course that the zoning official has no other means but to approve it, because that's the way that this is set up. This is purely just kind of a recommendation. It is not an up or down vote. It is not, you know, something that, you know, if the property owner doesn't like your input, that, you know, that Manny would then have the ability to say, okay, well, look, I'm going to, you know, until you change this or that, I'm going to do this. That's more of the gray area that's not covered by this ordinance. And that's what I want to make perfectly clear to the zoning commission here, that, you know, that's kind of the way that this is set up, where it's just, you know, purely just, you give it a look, you make your comments, and, you know, staff moves on.
thank you.
Could I take that?
Please.
Suppose it's appealed, is the commission, the town commission, the final? Do they have a role in this?
Well, they would, let's say that if Manny looks at it and says, you know what, I'm not going to approve, for whatever reason, I'm not going to approve this building, or you know, the way that the structure is currently set forth, in his role as the administrative official, then his decision, if he denies it, his decision could be appealed to the town commission.
And Mark, in your opinion, again, as an architect and in the trenches, do you think that this will work as a practical matter?
I think it's a start, you know, because it doesn't have a lot of teeth or tooth in it.
Right.
It's subject to a lot of ambiguity in my mind. I think this needs to be, I think it's a great start, don't misunderstand me. I think we got to start somewhere, but I think we're going to have to enact a little bit more detailed criteria for submission and review. Because, yeah, it really is going to make us all redundant if we have an opinion and we can't,
Right.
you can't enforce it.
Right.
Are we better off just changing the code so that it's more defined as to what you can and can't do?
I think this was a soft step into the process.
Well,
But again, let me just say this, because it's important. You know, we are the only community without a ARPB, RCOM, whatever you want to call it. Even private communities have ARPB. I've sat on 8 private communities as the architect reviewing. So this is nothing unique. I just want that to be understood. But how we soft step into this or soft shoe into this is, do we go in hard or do we do it in a more diplomatic, friendly, open way?
There are so many questions, and good ones. In the past, whenever we've done something like this, we have a lot of information on how other communities run this thing. How many a month could we handle? We get 7 a month. Does that mean we have to be here till 3 o'clock in the afternoon? You know what? But this has been done, as you suggest, by other communities. We should really find out how they've done it in detail and give us ideas on how we could run it.
Yes. Mark, would you be able to provide that kind of input
Well, I think
procedural input?
staff can do that. I mean, unfortunately, I go to those about 5 times a month, so.
You better not. Good.
But it's as easy as just looking at what submission requirements there are in terms of a form.
Good.
And maybe, tailoring those to our situation.
Right. Any other commissioners or have any other comments or questions? No? Well, with that, let's open it up to the public comment. Anybody in the audience would like to make, please, Mr. Brown?
Terry Brown, Harbor Drive South. First of all, I don't want any of my comments to be construed as being opposed to a review. I lived in this town a long time, 26 years, and there's been a number of houses in our neighborhood, 2 that are on Harbor Drive North and 3 that are on Harbor Drive South, that I would object to. They don't fit in. I might classify them as obnoxious, but that's my opinion in terms of aesthetics and fitting in. So I think that if I knew there was a place to go and argue that type of issue, it would have been great. The trouble is that there wouldn't have been enough public notice on any of these other past issues, because under public notice, you'd have to give all the detail to what you're reviewing before it's reviewed, right? You can't just say we're going to review a site today. They would have to have whatever the drawing was, whoever the applicants were, and all of that sort of thing before the public meeting, right?
Well, I mean, we would have that, but as far as like the agenda goes, it would be review site or review single-family home at such and such address. If you want to see the plans, you can come in and see them at the, at Town Hall. So it would be something like that, but I mean, that would have to be, probably a week or so is probably typical of at least a week public notice, in case people want to come in and speak on that, so.
Yeah, well, it is refreshing to have a town attorney that gives you straight-up answers without hidden agendas. I like that. But there's no real enforcement mechanism that I see, as has been pointed out. And I don't believe you can appeal to the town commission if the building official rejects it based on opinions, someone's opinion about the fitting in, the streetscape, or whatever the other terms, the criteria that you were using. There's no defined criteria. I think you're looking for a lawsuit if you reject it, in my opinion. If you tell a builder or a speculator that they can't build this because we don't like it, based on opinions from this board, who might have been influenced politically by other groups in the community. If I had a way to influence the houses built on my street politically, I would have done it. But of course, I don't have that much political clout. But you understand what I'm trying to say, that it's an opinion-based criteria.
It's objective.
Yeah, totally objective. And I think that you're looking for trouble unless you can define this more clearly in the code, that you have some actual enforcement. And this board is set up under the charter as advisory, not as different from the Board of Adjustments. So if it does, this board can't supersede building codes. The building official has to approve it if it meets all the codes, whether or not the neighbors like it or not. Are you going to start to get into the fact that people can paint their houses any color they want? In the town of Ocean Ridge, they could paint them orange, black, and no one could object. Is that right? So you could come screaming into the town official and complain about it, but there's nothing you could do about it. So I agree with your comments regarding that it's not something as it's laid out that's going to work, in my opinion. And it will get very political, and that means lobbying the members of this board, lobbying the town commissioners, and then you're going to have a problem where you're going to have different things happening based on opinions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any other public comment? Yes, please.
Yeah, ask your building official.
Would you please step up to the podium and provide your name and address, please?
My name is Don McIntosh. I'm your building official. you want to do this, you need to set up an architectural review board. Otherwise, it's not going to work. You want to set up a streetscape? What kind? What are you looking for? Greek Revival, Neo-Brutalism, Federalist? What kind of building do you want? How do you want your streets to look? As far as review, when we get the plans in, we'll ask for an extra set. We'll give you a set the same day we receive it. That way you have 30 days to review it too. Now, you're asking to do things here that unless you have an architectural review board, they're not going to happen. And as your building official, if someone comes in and they have a postmodern house or they want to put in something that neo-brutalism, hey, I have nothing to say that they can't do that. If I had an architectural review board, I refer it to the board and say, hey, this is on a streetscape. What do you want to do? So I would suggest that you seriously think about adopting an architectural review board. Set that board up, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. Any other public comment? Yes, please.
Yeah, Dave Hutchins, Harbor Drive North. The only issue that I see here, Brian, is buildings shall be consistent with established neighborhood character. Now, I live in the south end of town, so my idea of neighborhood character might be different from somebody who lives in the north end, or might be different than Terry's. And it's just too vague. So, getting to what Don said, I think it might be a good idea if we had some consensus on what really is against neighborhood character, rather than just one person's idea or being subject to lobbies or whatever. So my suggestion would be, let's figure out what really is against our town character in residences and go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. Anybody else from the public? Okay, thank you. Based on our public comment and discussion here, are there any further comments or motion that somebody would like to propose?
May I ask a question? Historically speaking, what has been the opposition to an ARB or ARC?
I just think historically, I've been here for 38 years and it's just been, this is a self-preserving town. Everybody's going to respect other people, but I think, we're a very popular destination right now.
Yes.
And with that comes some aggravation, and I think, I like what I hear. I mean, that's as I kind of hinted before, we either go all the way or no way. And I think I'm hoping that this commission may recommend staff go back and tailor some more formal, structured submission requirements so that we can, when I say we, us as a commission that are trying to make a judgment, have some guidelines as to what to, rather than, as Mr. Hutchins said, just likes or dislikes. Everybody's different. That's what makes a lay board work, because not everybody are going to see the same. So I think, I don't know, Jamie or Brian, whether, you need a motion or something to proceed.
Well, I mean, once again, I mean, it was very good discussion here because, and, at the very outset, all this was just basically saying, look, they would come in front of you, you would have discussion with them, and, I guess I would always hope that the developer would take into account what you say. But if the developer doesn't, okay, then that's the end of story. I mean, that's what in the current version, that's what it provides for. So if the board wants to, and once again, there's not going to be an appeal from that or anything, and that any I guess, denial by Manny of any building site or anything would probably not really be based on, or at least I would advise him not to base that solely upon whatever your, what comments he received from here, because if a developer meets the code, then they meet the code. Unless we provide an ordinance that says this is what you must do, and that it gives you the authority to say, okay, you must come here, you must get approval from this board before you can move forward. Now, if you want an ordinance like that, we can certainly draft one, and I think, as you have said before, most communities in this area have ordinances similar to that.
So, unless we need a formal motion and vote, may I suggest that the other commissioners are in agreement? We ask staff and you, Brian, to go back to the drawing board and come up with a more definitive ordinance that provides more formal review standards and a process for not only review but ultimate approval at some point. Is that sufficient for you to go forward?
If that's a consensus.
Or do we need a motion?
I just, if I can make one comment, the closest parallel I see to where you are with this is the coastal construction control line process that's currently in our code. Anybody that triggers that CCCL line when they're proposing to do something under town code has to come before the town commission for the purpose of advertising and communication and information so that they understand what's being proposed. They bless it and it goes on to DEP and all the other agencies that then permit it. Everybody that touches that line goes through that process. Under this prescription, everybody that touches the 50% rule would go under a similar process if it was your desire just to hear what's going on, what's being proposed, and opine on it, but then they would move forward on a regular trajectory. If you want to actually define what kinds of styles and what kinds of aesthetics and what kinds of thresholds are allowable in neighborhoods, then I think for this to be binding, you would have to create that criteria in code so that you have something that you measure everybody against, so it's not subjective. So I think your direction, if I'm hearing correctly, would be for us to go back to the drawing board and configure it up that way, either as a all-in or as just a courtesy review process. But either way, you'll have to meet on a regular basis, and you'll have to be able to scrutinize every project under the same criteria in order for it not to be legally challenged and be a problem for us down the road.
Sure. And may I suggest that the other alternative is to have a formal architectural review board and not have this commission review that. Just as an alternative. I'm not saying
That
we
is an
shouldn't,
option.
but just an idea.
I don't know if the attorney could opine whether this board could sit as that function separately or not, or if the town would be interested
No, if we
to
just
look
put
at
it in the code, you certainly can. So I just, as a point of clarification too, from what I'm hearing, and I think what the consensus is, that we are not looking for a code that specifies that, hey, you can only have 3 colors, you can only have this style, you can only do this. You are looking for something that that has a little bit more teeth to it, but also gives you better direction on what we may view as compatible or not, but yet you would still have the, if they can't obtain your recommendation for approval, then of course that would be appealed to the town commission, but this would be a step here that they would have to meet with your essentially okey-dokey on it, and then it would proceed forward to the zoning official to make sure that everything is compatible, or to make sure that the zoning code is met, but you all would be looking at other sections of the code to determine essentially compatibility. Does that sound about right?
Right. Yeah. Good, okay. If you feel you have sufficient direction, then let's move on to the next agenda item.
Okay.
Okay, the next agenda item is the debt setback proposed ordinance, and again, Brian, if you would, please give us a little background.
Okay, so basically, what we're proposing currently in the code, and I know that our town engineer is in the audience here, and that she may want to also comment on that, because I've had discussions with her on this as well, is that there is no setback for a pool setback or any other type of, I don't want to say structure, but any other type of impervious surface as far as from adjacent right-of-way lines, and we've ran into a couple of situations where that's created some issues. In my conversations with the town engineer, it seemed like that 3 feet was an appropriate setback, not only to kind of stay away from some of those issues where, you know, if you have a hard surface go right up to your neighbor's property line, then there's no room for vegetation, for a fence, potentially, whatever. So 3 feet seemed to be a legitimate, or I guess a common number that could be used. But if you don't mind, I may want to have the town engineer, if you want to kind of come up and comment on this
Good.
as well.
Please, Lisa. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Lisa Tropepi. I'm your town engineer. I've been your town engineer since about the year 2000, so it's going on about 17 years now. And as Mark had mentioned about historics, back in the day, couple decades ago, people would build a house and put a pool in the back and put their pool deck in, no issue. There wasn't a real privacy issue to speak of. Today, houses are being built in a very complex way. They're using our codes, maybe following the code, but finding ways to do things a little differently. They're putting pools on the side of the house. They're putting pools in the front of the house. And when you have nothing addressed with respect to setbacks, the pool decks are falling right on the line. In some cases, because we don't check them during construction when they're forming it, it falls a couple inches off the property line, which is on somebody's lot or our right-of-way. And so the code for a pool deck states that the water should sheet flow away from the pool itself. So you have storm water flowing off your pool deck. The code also says that you shall not impact adjacent properties, meaning your neighbor or the right-of-way. Well, if you put a pool deck up against the property line and it's sheet flowing away from the pool to meet your pool code, you're in violation of your other codes, so there's a conflict there. So staff has we've met several times the last several months. We talked about standards in the industry. What are the standards in the industry? So we're not making something up that no one else has tried over the years. And there has been setbacks in other municipalities that are 5 feet away from the property line. So we came up with 3, and we're presenting that to you today. And 3 gives the ability to deal with the drainage, the sheet flow of the deck. It also gives the property owner the ability to screen or landscape in those 3 feet, because privacy has become an issue as well. A lot of the challenges that we have as staff recently in the past couple years have been projects that meet the code but become a real issue to the adjacent property and a real issue in the right-of-way, where the manager has to make decisions as to whether we should allow landscaping to encroach on public property. And so we're proposing the 3 feet today to address not only the stormwater, but to address privacy issues and potential issues between us, our property, the right-of-way, and adjacent property owners who feel that they're being encroached upon and people's privacy is being challenged
And
or
Lisa,
compromised.
As our town engineer, do I understand that you are recommending to this commission that we advise our town commission to approve this ordinance as written?
Yes, sir.
Good, okay, thank you. Good. Any comments
Yeah,
from
there's
the
one
commission?
other thing, and Lisa would know. FEMA are universally raising their minimum elevations. And it's going to play havoc. I've dealt with it in other towns where if there's a non-conforming house next door and the present or the new house has to maintain, it plays havoc with the drainage control.
That's true, that's right.
And I think that's also gives us a little buffer to work with here. So I think it's an excellent.
Right,
Good.
that's right,
Good.
thank you.
Good. Anybody else in the commission? Anybody in the public comment? Can I hear a motion, please?
So moved.
Good. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That was easy. Thank you, Lisa. Good comments. We appreciate that. Well, let's move on to the final item on the agenda. And this one is a proposed ordinance regarding construction sites. Yes.
Yes, sir. What we have tried to do in this ordinance is to pull in other, I guess, references to construction sites in one code or in one body in your land development code to have it located there. We've also added some particular things on that. Now, if I can, I will just kind of go through and hit some of the highlights of the proposed ordinance. It's my understanding that we've had some issues with parking, whether it's along the right-of-way, and this deals with construction sites. So for everyone out there, this ordinance deals with managing construction sites. What we have tried to do is basically provide that any time that anyone during construction, if they need to park a vehicle, that they will go ahead and that they will need to have a plan in place at the very beginning to show where all the vehicles will be parked. That they would own, and this is one of the questions here that I kind of have for this board to see which way you want to go on this. We could either prohibit parking in the right-of-way altogether, which is kind of the way that we have set it up, unless the building official says, no, look, they've worked out a plan, here's what I'm going to allow them to do. Otherwise, any parking in the right-of-way is prohibited. So therefore, that they would either have to show on their plan, when they initially submit their plan, they will need to show where the porta potty's going, where the dumpster's going, where all the parking is going to be going. That parking would have to be hardscaped. There are certain things that they would, as far as loading and unloading material, they would, the ways that they would need to secure it. Also, we've added a whole section on temporary construction fences, where basically this is what they're going to have to do. We have mandated this is the type of fence, this is whether it's green or black, but they would have to have it around the entire site. Now, there's some communities that I've seen, they have it around the entire site. Some of them just have it along where it's adjacent to a front public right-of-way. That's another question for you all. Currently, the way it's worded right now, it is on all four sides of the site. So whether you abut the intercoastal or the ocean, you're going to have this construction fence up there. And then it talks about the screening and the access points and different things and the type of signage that may be allowed on it. We have also made reference in here as far as any noise and times for construction. I've referred to other sections of the code that call that out without repeating those sections in this ordinance. As far as the silt fence goes, we've talked about it and basically said, look, you need to meet the NPDES requirements, and that would really be up to the town engineer or the building official to say, okay, you're going to have a silt fence on your site or in these locations in order to do that. As far as tree protection and land clearing, I've made reference to another section of the code that references that you already had in your code that talks about this is the way you protect trees, or if you're going to remove trees, you're going to need to have a plan in place to do that. On construction trailers and storage trailers, they will also have to be an approved site plan for that, and they will have to get approval for that before they can operate it, and then as far as how long the construction trailer is allowed on the site. The other big thing that's here that we adopt a construction site management handbook, and that is also attached to your packet. And this is basically, and there are certain things that there are certain typos and things like that that we'll need to correct in this, but What we've tried to do or attempted to do on this is anytime a contractor comes into the town of Ocean Ridge, to basically say, here you go, you sign off on this, so that way you know what the rules are here, and you can't come back later on if our building official goes to the site to say, okay, you didn't do this, or you aren't in compliance with this or that. You know, they're going to be deemed to have knowledge that, no, we are in compliance with this. So a lot of this stuff you already had in your code. We're just kind of pulling it in some different places and making reference to it under one code section to try to make it more, I guess, user-friendly, if I could use that term. And the biggest thing about this, especially on the construction site management handbook, is to try to make contractors and developers aware of what is expected from them at the very beginning, so that way there are not missteps, there are not misunderstandings. It is very clear from the very beginning, look, this is what you need to do, and this is how you need to proceed.
Good, thank you. Any comments or questions from the commission?
I have a comment.
Yes, please. Richard.
64-49, talking about temporary structures, says that temporary structures in connection with building construction or land development projects within a town may be erected for occupancy by personnel involved in the construction or land development project in accordance, and it references section 67.9. 67.9 says, construction storage trailers shall not be used as dwelling or lodging units. So isn't that kind of a contradiction?
Well, when we talk about in connection with the building, maybe erected for occupancy by personnel involved in the construction or land development project, so it's not talking about occupancy to live in. It is just you can occupy this if you are the architect, the construction manager, or whatever.
I mean, use it as an office during the day?
Exactly. Well,
I
yes,
think
for
that
the
should be better
construction site.
clearly
Okay.
specified then. That, to me, seems like it's at
That's a
odds
good
with each
point.
other.
Excellent, excellent. Anybody else?
Yes.
Mr.
we-
Walker?
Are we enforcing these rules now that we have? The one I consider especially is parking on right-of-ways. If we don't allow construction of parking on right-of-ways, what about all the landscapers that do it all the time?
Well, there's an exception in your code that talks about for whether it's, let's say, a landscaper, an AC person, a plumber, somebody who's stopping by where it is not exactly, or where it's not defined as construction work that's taking place on the property. So therefore, there's exceptions in your code that allow for them to park on the right-of-way now, which I didn't touch, and I don't think we really want to mess with that. We did talk about it on the staff level when we were talking about this, and it was felt that, you know what, if that would be, I don't know how we would address that, because, I mean, in my neighborhood where I live, I mean, some mornings when I leave there, it's you're doing you're just trying to weave your way through all of those vehicles that are parked in the right-of-way.
The problem with right-of-way in general, in a town that has damn few garages or in an area, is that people use it for regular parking, residents. And some of the issue is in enforcement of what we now have.
It could be. I mean, once again, we are not addressing that, because I think the way that we had kind of looked at that is not, normally that is something that comes and goes, whereas on a construction site, it may be going on for 6 months or 8 months, and you have a whole slew of cars every day from 8 in the morning till 5 in the evening, just parked there constantly, and that is what this is meant to address.
Good. Thank you. Mark, please.
The only one that brings a little concern is the temporary fence construction. Depending on the size of the project, as you can see, some of the oceanfront projects that are under construction now abide by the screen and the 6-foot fence, but I'm not sure that all projects can accommodate that, or now the flip side to that, it's a huge liability issue, because if a person walks onto a construction site, even with a no trespassing sign, and there are serious hazardous conditions and get injured, then it brings a whole other level of liability. But I think, as you said, Brian, on the onset, I think the right-of-way is a fair designating limit to protection, so that, you know, if you have neighbors on either side, I think it's, you know, apart from the silt fences and the other requirements for debris and dust and dirt to be migrating onto adjacent, I'm not sure we want to have a lot of full enclosed, and definitely not on the waterways. I mean, I think we'd get more pushback from residents if a building is taking 18 months to construct and you're looking at a silt fence or a 6-foot-high fence. But I think from the right-of-way, that's you know, due diligence where you at least discourage, you know, because we all want to walk on and snoop and see what's going on. And if there's some barrier, rather than a silt fence that's only 18 inches high, I think that might be something we look at rather than having, you know, and depending on the scale of the project, some of the smaller projects, I just think it's a little bit of an imposing request.
Good point, thank you. Anybody else?
Couple of questions.
Yes, Penny, please.
67-1 subsection H, is the town commission the appropriate body for them to appeal to? It just seems like they meet once a month. I don't know what's customary.
Well, that's kind of a question, you know, if, because we're talking about storing material off-site. And so I think that's kind of the way that we left it there with them. However, if you all have a better suggestion or, other comments on that, we can certainly, once again, this is for you for discussion, so.
Is that customary?
Mark? Yes,
Yeah, the building official usually takes it to
okay.
council or
And it
commission.
works?
Yeah.
Good, okay.
And then,
It's a good question, but I think we have to let the council or commission in this case.
I was just thinking about potential delay and all of that, if this came up at the first day after the town council had just met. It's a month before they hear it.
I mean, the
What do
only
they do with
alternative would
their
be for Jamie to
materials?
be the arbiter of this, or the town manager, and him to look at it and make a decision. I mean, everything that would be within your purview.
We could, the town commission can also call for special meetings in special cases, but,
I mean, if it's a housekeeping issue, then
Yeah, that's extreme.
town manager can take.
generally
Yeah.
it can be
That's what
worked
I
out.
thought.
Okay.
I think so.
You would, okay, good,
Okay.
good.
And then section 67-9 subsection 5. In 67.4, you talk about remedying the situation before there's enforcement proceedings. So in that second sentence, it says, if land development or construction activities do not commence within the required time period, could we then insert, they must remove the construction trailer, and if not, then the building official would initiate code enforcement proceedings? Shouldn't they have the onus to comply by removing that trailer before he has to? It's just an affirmative
Yes.
statement, it's just
No, I
housekeeping
think
issue.
that's good, sure,
I don't think
Either.
it's significant.
okay. Any other commission comments?
Is the trailer mandatory by this?
No, it's only if they want to have one.
Okay.
So this
Wanna-
is,
yeah,
yes,
that's-
no,
that's
this is not
another-
requiring them to have one.
Yeah, and let me just add that I did a little research among other communities and towns in our area, and the idea of a construction manual handbook appears to be very effective and practical, and it works. Good.
No, I agree.
Public comment? Mr. Brown?
Just a couple of quick comments. Maybe a little bit esoteric, but as far as parking for construction and the right-of-way, the biggest problem that I've seen, on our street, there's lots of service vehicles all day long, all week long, and you gotta weed through them, as someone pointed out. But A1A is a state road right-of-way. You have one sidewalk in the entire town on the west side of A1A. Now, I know that the police have been much better with monitoring that, but you do have service people and construction people parking right on top of the sidewalk, where people have to go out onto A1A to get past that vehicle. So if that could be like a special designated zone in the town for no parking ever, unless it's an emergency vehicle or a fire vehicle, I think that would be something worth considering. The only other thing that wasn't mentioned, and I know that might be impossible, but on construction site management, there's no length of time that someone has to be finished with a project. We have a house on our street that's been under review for 2 years and under construction for 3 years. Now, the owners are very nice people, I get along with them, but they pulled the permit themselves, and I talked to Don McIntosh once about it. There's no way to move that along. I mean, even Malnick, as much time as he spent on 1 billion, did another billion, he got them done. And we're talking about the house on the entrance to our neighborhood will be finished way before these other people get a CO. So I don't know who would look at that. There's no criteria to address that issue?
You know, the issue that comes up with things like that is you have the issue of the building code that basically says, look, as long as you pull a permit within every 6 months, then you're okay. So it's hard.
And quote, there's continuous work.
Well, supposedly, yes. And, you know, and as long as the building official looks at that and says, no, they're in compliance, they've met that requirement, which most contractors out there know how to do that. And they can do that. It is just very tough, and I haven't seen it. I'm not aware of any other codes where there is a drop-dead date, because what are you going to do if a home is 50% completed?
Yeah.
And we come down on them and go, nope, that's it, you're done, tear it down. You know, that's really not a viable.
Yeah, I appreciate the
Alternative,
nature of the
so.
problem, but for a while, the porta potty disappeared, and we were all very happy on the street, because we didn't have to look at a porta potty. And then the building official said you had to have a porta potty back there.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any other public comment? Yes, Mr. McIntosh, please. Name and address?
Don McIntosh, your building official. Section 67 point, or dash 9, item number 5, land development or construction activities on a site must commence within 1 year. That's a violation of the Florida Building Code and also Florida State Statute. You have 180 days after a building permit is issued to begin work. Item number 4, certificate of occupancy shall be issued before a trailer is occupied. Also a violation of the Florida Building Code, Florida State Statute. We do not issue certificates of occupancy for construction trailers. They are not habitable. There's no place to prepare food. There's no area for bathing, sleeping, anything else. Item
Excuse me, what, would you
I
explain
beg your
that?
pardon, I'm in the middle of my presentation.
Well, I
I'll
just-
answer your question as soon as I'm
Well,
finished.
thank you very much.
A construction,
Appreciate
number
that.
3, a construction trailer shall not be allowed for more than 2 years, including any renewal periods. Depending on the amount of construction, the size of construction, and the time, as Mr. Brown pointed out, if it is an owner-builder or whatever, they can stretch a single-family dwelling up to 10 years if they, you know, only work, and they need to call for one inspection within 180 days, and that continues their permit. It is possible for a single-family dwelling to take 10 years to complete. Do we urge contractors and homeowners, owner-builders, to complete prior to that point? We strive to assist them. However, within the confines of the Florida Building Code, we're hard-pressed to whip that horse to the finish line. Your question, sir?
Any other questions before I ask my question? Okay. Would you please explain a little bit? I'm not sure I understood the idea of cooking on site. What was that comment? Just elaborate a
A
little bit.
habitable building is defined as a structure where you could prepare a meal where you can bathe, where you can sleep.
Good.
Construction trailer has none of those.
Good,
A
thank you.
construction trailer is simply for the engineer or architect or the project manager for that specific job, to have their approved plans on site and control how the work is being accomplished for that particular question.
Good.
May I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there another document other than a certificate of occupancy that you issue, or is it simply the permit?
We only issue 2 documents. The first one being a certificate of occupancy. This is normally for a habitable structure.
Right.
That would be for a 1- and 2-family dwelling. The second one is a certificate of completion. Let's say that you decide to remodel your home, and for whatever reason, it doesn't hit that 50% threshold, then we would issue it, a certificate of completion. Normally, that's so that you, as the property owner or homeowner, that you have something to show your insurance people,
Right.
you know, saying, hey, listen, we had this update, we did this, and this, and we have a certificate of completion by the building department.
Okay, but for the construction trailer, it would be just the permit for
Just,
that
yeah,
trailer?
we just issue a building permit to them, but there is no certificate of occupancy that can be issued. That would be a violation of the Florida state statutes and the Florida Building Code.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. McIntosh.
welcome.
Those are good comments. We appreciate it. Anybody else in the public? Good. So let's proceed to acting on this proposal. But before we do that, to help Tracy, let me suggest we had several good conditions that were raised, and maybe we can outline those conditions before we go to the motion. Make sense? Okay. Mark, I think you started with a condition regarding the handbook.
The handbook?
Well, yeah,
I was just talking about the protection,
production, yes.
fencing, that it be
Fencing.
mandatory on the right-of-way
Okay.
and optional on.
So condition number 1 is we propose to our commission that we only make the fencing mandatory on the
Public right-of-way.
public right-of-way. Good. And then, yes, Penny, you had a couple.
It was about the town commission on 67-1, subsection H. Perhaps the town manager can handle that housekeeping issue, or someone else, something to look at.
Is that, and is that pragmatic, practical? Yes.
In terms of expediting the process,
Okay, good, good. Okay, so that's
Hey.
condition number 2.
can I
Yes.
just back up to the previous comment? In only requiring fencing on the public right-of-way, we are acknowledging that adjacent property owners would not be enjoying the benefit of a construction fence between their property and the construction site as presented, correct? So this is just for the purpose of screening proposal on the right-of-way side.
How are you protecting the neighbors from all the shrapnel?
I understand the
Again, my only
waterways.
concern is the size of the project. I mean, it's an economic hardship sometimes. You know, as I said, we have silk fences and other requirements. It may be a little bit too lenient, which is unusual for me, but,
Is there a trigger that would be comfortable?
Do you want me to add something in there that basically says, look, the construction fencing shall only be required to screen, the public right-of-way and along the sides unless there's another appropriate barrier that is currently in place, because I believe on most sites, there's a fence, there's a wall,
Right.
there's a hedge,
That's
there's
right.
something like that, and I
Right.
think that's kind of what you were getting at,
Sure.
was if there's that, then why put up another fence right up against that?
and I think the building official can report if there's any shrapnel. You know,
Again, Don McIntosh, your building official. Over 2 years ago, I wrote a memorandum on fencing and Right now, we require fencing on a case-by-case basis. We try to get anything that's along A1A to be fenced completely, because we have a lot of people that are looky-loos. They driving along, they see construction going right away, they want to look at what's going on rather than keeping their eye on the road. Silt fencing is a requirement on every project site. Everyone. There's not a construction site that should not have. We do not require fencing if we are doing on a multi-story building, and the attorney and I have talked about this before. If they're doing, let's say, some type of concrete restoration or whatever, we may have some type of shroud that is up on the side of the building to keep any concrete from chipping away and falling out into some place where it might be injurious to somebody. But for the most part, we do not require fencing in a case like that where they're doing concrete restoration or something to that effect. Same way with roofing. We do not require, you're at the top of a 6-story building, and obviously we have concerns with wind and everything else. Coastal construction line construction, we have areas that are required to be frangible. We take that seriously. We work closely with DEP on everything from frangible areas to turtle lighting. Turtle lighting, we do not have a code for that. However, as your building official, I'm required, because that is an ordinance by Palm Beach County. So under their ordinances, I'm required to take that into consideration. But as far as fencing goes, over 2 years ago, we wrote that, and hopefully that may help you, and that is on file.
Thank you. Ms. McIntosh, while you're up, you made a couple of other good points. While we're discussing conditions to add to any motion, would you mind, I wasn't taking notes, would you mind just backing up and giving us again your couple of points that you're proposing with regard to this ordinance?
Are you talking about the site ordinances there?
The handbook. And
Oh, the handbook.
I think he was referring to section 67-9, 3,
9 is
4,
where
and 5.
I was
Those
concerned with.
particular
However,
sections.
my the only thing I have umbrage with on your construction management book is under number 4. It says prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, all such facilities shall be removed from the site. That's a given.
Good.
All right, because the town engineer and myself, I go out, I do the building final. Ms. Trepepi does the drainage. We get an elevation certificate. We get a final survey. This is all part of the paperwork that we bring in and is required to be on file by the state of Florida. So you may want to strike that last line.
Okay. Good.
All right?
Thank you. Penny, did you have another condition that you were proposing?
No, we talked about the construction
Good,
trailer,
okay,
just an affirmative statement that
Okay.
it be removed.
So
Prior.
Tracy, do you have the conditions down, Pat? One was fencing.
Yes, but did you make a final decision on the
Yes,
fencing?
let's discuss that.
Right.
Full site fencing or just public right-of-way fencing, based on Don McIntosh's comments? Any?
And if I can also clarify, the only time that fencing is required is that on construction sites undergoing land disturbing construction or land development activities. So if there is construction that's taking place, like just a roof or something like that, that's not land disturbing or land development activity. So no fence, this fencing provision would not apply.
Okay, but the condition still on the table is in the event of a land disturbing construction situation, do we want full fencing or just public right-of-way fencing? Any,
Well, it has to be a case by case. I mean, we can't, as Brett and Brian mentioned, some properties already have wood fences or, we just don't need to have duplication. So I guess it could be up to the judgment of the building official to see. At a minimum, I think we got to protect the public right-of-way areas.
so let's
And-
phrase the condition in that manner.
Okay, do you want to have the condition in there that basically says adjacent to all public right-of-way areas excluding, the ocean or waterway, the intercoastal waterway, excluding those, that you shall have the required, the fencing that's described herein, and also along adjacent sides unless there is an adjoining fence, hedge, or wall. And exactly, barrier, and then if there is one there, then we may not require you to have the fencing, but if there's not one there, then we would require you to have the fencing.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is that appropriate?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Good, so that's the first condition. The second condition is, yes,
The
Jay,
building
you had a
official
comment?
would make that call on whether that's required on,
If there's other appropriate barriers there, then it would be up to the building official to decide, no, there's an appropriate barrier here, I'm not gonna make you have the fence in place. I mean, if there's nothing there, then it's kinda like, okay, you're gonna have to have the fence.
And without making you walk up again, Don, does that work for you?
Yes, sir.
Good.
Coastal construction takes place. Let's say that they have sea grapes on one side, sea grapes on the, sea oats on the other. Those are, by definition, under DEP, cannot be disturbed. So fencing there, what we would do is we would require some silt fencing, but we would not screen that off because this natural vegetation would be considered sufficient.
Good, okay. So that nails down condition number one. Condition number two is any issues are referred to the town manager? Okay?
Yes, on the
Yes.
off-site
And-
loading, yes.
Yes, okay, good.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you've got the other conditions?
I do, just to address a couple of the ones that was raised by the building official.
Yes.
I think under 67-9, number 3, I think we will still leave that condition in there because even though I certainly agree with Mr. McIntosh that some construction can take longer than 2 years, if it does, they would then have to come in front of the town commission to get approval to leave it there for a longer period of time. Now, that may come out when it goes in front of the town commission. They may say, well, look, now if there's an active building permit, we don't want to have this come up. But I think that's kind of a good safeguard to have in there, so that way if construction is dragging out, if it's got to go in front of the town commission, then maybe that might be a way to hurry them up. On number 4, a certificate of occupancy shall be issued before the trailer is occupied. We'll call that something else. But they need some sort of approval from the building official to say, okay, you can go in here and you can occupy this at this point in time. And then on number 5, as far as the time allowed within 1 year, I certainly understand what Mr. McIntosh is saying, however, that's the building code. There may be some things that apply or that come into play where the building code is not activated. I still want to have that 1 year period in there that's the catch-all that basically says, look, whether or not a building permit has been pulled or plan submitted, once you start certain activities here, you've got 1 year in order to, for the construction, you've got 1 year to go ahead and do this. So I would still like to leave that in
Okay,
there.
great.
I don't think it's in conflict with the building code. I think it just adds another catch-all phrase at the end of the building code.
Got it, thank you. So we've got 5 conditions on the table?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, can I just ask one question, and I'm sure I haven't looked at it. When you demolish a property, we do have the grassing and sodding and protection.
it's in code currently.
Because I know we've had that, there was one on Island Drive that went on for years, of just open dirt.
Right.
So I don't know. I'll leave it alone.
Okay, okay, well, keeping in mind the 5 conditions on the table, do I have a motion with or without all or some of those conditions to proceed with our recommendation for this ordinance to the town commission.
Yep.
Motion?
I make that motion?
Subject to the 5 conditions.
Correct.
Yes, okay, good. All in favor? Thank you, Ms. Morrow.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good. Okay, is there any other business to come before the
Yes,
commission?
Mr.
Yes.
Chair, just briefly, item 5 on your agenda talks about a discussion regarding the assignment
Oh,
of,
yes, thank you.
as an infrastructure surtax citizen oversight committee. I just wanted to update you on that. You have no action today on that, but you've been relegated by the town commission to serve in an additional capacity, which is to be compliant with Palm Beach County ordinances on the new penny sales tax. We have to have a body of citizens that reviews expenditures that are made on an annual basis to assure that they are compliant with the criteria set in the ordinances of the county for appropriate appropriations of the penny sales tax monies that will come to the town. The amount approximately for the town of Ocean Ridge this first year is projected to be about $108,000. It'll be our intent to add those monies to infrastructure improvements in the already budgeted infrastructure improvements in the town, and they will fit within a criteria that is compatible with the Palm Beach County ordinances for receipt of those revenues. What will happen is that this body here, along with your alternate members, which will add 2 members to your committee, when this topic comes up before you, you will be sitting as a P&Z board member. There'll be an agenda item for the review and confirmation that the appropriations for infrastructure fit that criteria. You will sunset or reset as the recess as the P&Z board, or adjourn, reconvene as the sales tax oversight committee, address that agenda item, and then adjourn as that committee. It was felt that this was the most expeditious way to both use the same folks that are dealing with the issues of building and infrastructure, as well as include some additional citizens and meet the compliant aspect of the Palm Beach County ordinance. So I just wanted to inform you of that. There's no business before you today. That'll come later in the year that you'll be asked to sit in that capacity.
Good. I'd like to thank the town commission for giving us that pleasure.
Another layer.
Good. Any other business? If not, I call for a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Good meeting.